I've been on a collision course with Majora's Mask for what feels like my entire life, not only because it's one of the few Zelda games that I hadn't played before starting this series, but also because the game is nearly as old as I am. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is the direct sequel to Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. It started out development as what we might think is Master Quest, or more specifically, the fabled Ura Zelda for the cancelled 64 DD disc add-on. However, the team didn't believe making what would essentially be just an expanded version of Ocarina would be very creatively fulfilling, so instead, they pitched the idea to Shigeru Miyamoto of making an original entry. And Miyamoto agreed, so long as they could make it in just 1 year. Now, if you're thinking that's a minuscule amount of time to develop a game, it is. The grueling development cycle that took place over 1999 is a horror story for everyone involved, and it's no surprise that the team's feelings of resentment, foreboding, and dread seeped into the very DNA of this game's design. Whether it's the ticking clock of the looping 3-day cycle, the weird new foreign locations and characters and enemies, or, more likely, the moon with a f***ing face that's gonna crash into the earth! This game feels designed to put pressure on you. What also helps is the art style. Although the game reuses the majority of its assets from Ocarina, they are by no means similar feeling games. Majora's Mask might have some of the strongest art direction I've ever seen in a video game. It's genuinely masterful how they take so much of Ocarina's iconography and twist it into an uncanny mirror of itself. Yusuke Nakano returns to provide the main artwork, and you can see he draws far more heavily on his Western comic inspirations like Frank Frazetta, but more specifically Mike Mignola's work on Hellboy with his stark use of shadow. This is coupled with Takaya Imamura's designs inspired by Asian, African and Mesoamerican tribal masks, along with returning character designers Yoshiki Haruhana, Satomi Asakawa and newcomer Yoshiyuki Oyama. The character design in this game is supreme across the board. Nakano's style really brings them to life in some of my favourite artwork in the series' history. And I'm gonna trample all over it. We start off with Link, who is by most accounts identical to his appearance in Ocarina of Time, but not entirely. For one, he has a new design for both his sword and his shield, and his game model now features a red belt across his chest that strangely isn't featured in the main artwork, but I will be including it here just to help to make this design a bit more unique. The pose is going to be a combination of 3 pieces of artwork, the foundational piece being this one by Nakano with influences from this promotional artwork for the 3DS game, as well as this render from Hyrule Warriors. The most difficult part of the piece in the sketching phase was actually the arm. It was pretty hard to visualise when drawing it as a 2D shape, but painting it inevitably made it much easier in that regard. Drawing the face was easy this time around, although you can see I do deliberate a lot on how best to render it in the end. I wanted to emulate Nakano's bold lighting choices here by submerging the piece in shadow, complementing this Link's more reserved body language, him reaching for his sword, looking over his shoulder at you. I wanted to communicate that this is a Link who's lost most of the carefree attitude of his youth. So now the sketching is done and we move on to... Well, this is inconvenient. One of the very first things Skullkid does to Link, aside from jumping him in the Lost Woods and stealing his horse, is to turn him into a little Deku scrub, which is both parts terrifying and kinda cute. Who's this guy? Yes, this game doesn't just feature Link in his regular human body, it also features a bunch of different transformations you can unlock, all with unique strengths, weaknesses and abilities of their own. The Deku mask is the first mask transformation you unlock, and in fact, in rather a bold move, the game forces you to spend at least 1 cycle in this body, with your sole objective being to figure out how to regain your Hylian form. As a piece of design, I really like how they take the key characteristics of Link and find fun ways to transplant them onto a Deku scrub, like the yellow leaves for his hair, the little skirt, the gloves and the boots, and his massive hat. In my sketch, I wanted to play into those elements with the hat twirling behind him like a figure skater with a ribbon. Deku Link is very light and bouncy, so I wanted to capture that by drawing his signature twirl. It's such an expressive little character design, and it really helps to make you feel small and helpless in the preliminary hours of the game. The culture shock of being thrust into this strange new world and scrambling to learn all its rules is mirrored by the shock of having to reckon with this brand new playstyle and gameplay structure. At the same time, however, Deku Link has a bucket load of appeal to him. He's genuinely quite adorable, which helps soften the bleak atmosphere that slowly creeps in over the 3-day cycle. This game's visual direction is a masterclass of balancing tone. It gleefully indulges in shades of terror and tragedy, while keeping the more light-hearted elements in sharp focus. In my opinion, Zelda is always at its best when it's dancing the line between whimsy and fear. The actual painting itself is rather simple because Deku Link is made up of a lot of very basic shapes. His main body is basically a smooth block of wood, his head is a sphere, his arms and legs are like sticks, and the rest of him is very round and exaggerated. This is a very cartoony design, but you can tell there's a very deliberate care taken to make sure it works when rendered as simple polygons. So because of this, the majority of the work goes into the textures, specifically with the lines across his wooden body meant to replicate either bark or probably aged lines you find on tree trunks. The way that I did it was to use the lines to give the shape of his anatomy more emphasis, like the pads of his fingers or the wrinkles around his eyes. If you can see the material react to the shapes of his form, then it just makes the design more real. Surprisingly, the leaves that made up his hair were quite hard to get right from a colour perspective because it's a very specific tone of yellow, just shifting towards green. But I love how you have the bright yellow contrasting with the darkened wood of his forehead as it slowly brightens into his cheeks. The background is the most intensive that I've worked on so far, but I really enjoyed it. It becomes a bit of a necessity when the only material you can get for a location isn't in the best quality, but it's also a lot of fun to reconstruct it and develop it into something new. It reminds me of those artists who take those Pokemon trading cards and paint the rest of the background onto them, something I'm going to do more often. And with all that said and done, the first mask transformation painting is finished. Let's take a look. What an adorable little scrub he is. This is definitely one of my favourites of the series. It reminds me of my Link's Awakening piece in a lot of ways. It's a great starting point for the rest of the paintings. Oh, speaking of which, I now present to you the segue of healing. Ugh, that's better. Tell you what, the Happy Mask salesman is one creepy motherfucker, but he sure does keep his word. Now where were we? Oh yes! Now Link's face here is based off of Leonardo DiCaprio from his 1993 debut movie This Boy's Life. DiCaprio was slightly older in this film than Link's canon age, but he still has a lot of his baby fat, and I wanted to give Link a world weariness that he didn't have in Ocarina. DiCaprio has the rage and discontent that I thought was thematically appropriate for this Link at this stage in his life. You can see that in rendering he has this early 90s glow to him that I toned down as the painting goes on, but from the very start of the painting, I wanted to use this harsh rim light coupled with a dark core shadow. I'm typically very conscious of the light sources of each of these paintings and how they look in comparison to the others. The goal of this painting in particular was to make him stand out. As the art direction for each game becomes more distinct as the series goes on, I want each of my paintings to reflect that same intent. At the same time, getting these tonal values right was probably the most difficult part of the entire process. It's tempting when painting to have values fade into each other, and often I found that having sharp divides between shades of colour actually helps to better communicate the subject. Getting the shape of his cheek right, for example, was a significant challenge simply because the extreme tonal values made getting the gradient of the subsurface scattering on his skin very tricky. The skin can either look too grey or too waxy depending on which tonal extreme you go for, but I compensated for this by making sure he had plenty of red in his cheeks and not resorting to using pure white for the highlights. Another problem is by soaking the piece in these vast swathes of shadow, you risk losing a lot of detail that's very important for making the piece readable. Shadow is great for obscuring detail, and it certainly made my life easier in the past, but when the goal is to show off a character design, you don't want the lighting getting in the way. Now, I had never played Majora's Mask before this series, and to do so, I used the decompiled PC port Ship of Harkinian 2, with customizable controls, textures, and several quality of life improvements. However, even without those additions, it's clear to see that even 24 years later, this game represents a massive artistic achievement. However, I can also see why it's one of the less popular entries in the series, especially compared to its big brother, Ocarina of Time. Ocarina is the golden myth, the heroic story that is glorious and iconic in its own way. Playing Ocarina of Time makes you feel like a fairy tale hero on a quest to save the world. It's fun and uplifting, whereas Majora's Mask is a dark and unnerving and overwhelming experience. It feels alien and sometimes even hostile to the player. At least, at first, because over time it slowly becomes something else. Despite such high concepts serving as its foundation, the game's core themes are expressed in the smallest of interactions. The game is filled with characters with their own internal worlds, their own schedules, their own anxieties, their own hopes and dreams and regrets, and the game's most valuable collectibles, the masks themselves, are mostly rewards for aiding these characters in finding peace. Mastery over this game represents something far different than just mechanical knowledge or skill. Truly beating Majora's Mask requires intimate knowledge of Termina and its people. It's almost impossible to play this game and not develop a sense of empathy that you don't really feel in many other games. It begs you to care about these people, to invest yourself in their well-being, and because of the ever-present time pressure, every second you spend helping them is a deliberate choice. Funnily enough, time is probably my most important resource for painting as well, because the more time I take on a piece, the more I'm able to slowly develop each section and decide exactly what it needs to work. The shield, for example, took a bit of time to really nail down because it's a very precise design, and using the metal to highlight those shapes can risk sort of breaking its place in the tonal hierarchy, shall we say. Eventually, I landed on a dark blue multiplier layer for the shadows to give it this rich, cool colour that ties the piece together very nicely. If there's one thing that I think I could have done better, it's probably the legs. They're not bad, but I struggled to really add detail to them in a way that didn't distract from the rest of the body. It's more important that the viewer's eyes are on Link's face and that general area, so the legs would have to remain slightly simplified for the time being. The tunic as well is always a bit of a challenge. You really don't want to invent folds for the sake of it, but at the same time it can be a bit of a boring piece of canvas real estate without them. So I always try to find some ways to add detail that complements the rest of the piece. The last thing left to do is painting Clockdown as the background, which I found very gratifying using my perspective skills to elaborate on the rest of the town square and the sky as well, adding in the moon just starting its descent. And with that, the painting is complete. The last time I painted Child Link, I didn't really have the best time of it, which you would know if you watched my Ocarina of Time video. So I was very anxious in the lead up to this painting that I was going to similarly struggle. However, that didn't happen here. Sure, it wasn't easy, but I am much happier at the end of this painting process than I was last time. I like to think it's because I'm improving, or at the very least, I'm getting better at working within my limitations. Now, shall we move on to the other paintings, because we've got at least 3 more to get through before... No, this can't be right. What do you mean it's been a month? It's barely even started yet. It can't have been that long. How could... I wanted to get it done. No, I wanted to get it done. I told myself I could do it. I told myself I could do it. I don't have enough time. Oh god, I need more time. If only I had more time. If only I had more time. So, yes, this video is a part 1. 2 paintings in this video, 3 in the next. I wanted to get this all done before Christmas, but that's clearly not gonna happen. Nor does it need to. We face a lot of stress at Christmas, trying to get things done, trying to help others, trying to make the season the best it can be, and that's a kind of stress you can drown in if you're not careful. So consider this my Christmas present to you, this holiday season. You've done enough. I've done enough. Take a break. Spend some time with your friends and your family. Rest. I'll be back next year, hitting the ground running with another video, and I hope to see you there too. And as we move into the new year, I just want to say that 2024 has been absolutely crazy. I've been more busy than I think I have ever been in my life. Not just with YouTube, but with a whole load of other things. I mean, I'm moving house soon, so, you know, that's fun just on its own. But I'm really excited for what comes next. I've got a lot of plans for future videos and all sorts of new art challenges, so if you want to keep up to date or you're just feeling generous this holiday season, hop onto the Patreon. We have a fun time there. Follow me on my Instagram, follow me on my bluesky, you know, all that sort of thing. Enjoy the rest of the holidays, folks. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next year. Have a good Christmas.